In my last video, I told you about the deadliest roller coaster accidents in history, tragic stories where everything went wrong and people didn't make it home. But today, I want to share the complete opposite. Stories where everything should have gone wrong, yet somehow, miraculously, people survived. In this video, I'm going to tell you 8 incredible survival stories that are almost impossible to believe. But I have to warn you, this video contains content that might shock you. British skydiving instructor Michael Holmes was preparing for his 3rd jump of the day in 2006. He double-checked his equipment, and his colleagues had triple-checked it. Michael had completed nearly 7,000 jumps in his career. That day, the instructor was filming a tandem jump over the New Zealand city of Taupo. When the plane reached 15,000 feet, the skydivers jumped. Michael circled around the tandem pair to get the best shots, then deployed his parachute. But instead of a smooth descent, Michael immediately started spinning violently. His main parachute had tangled and wouldn't open properly. He disconnected it to deploy his reserve chute, but the canopy somehow didn't separate, and Holmes kept falling. He tried to cut the lines with a knife, but the spinning was so intense he couldn't lift his arms. Michael barely managed to look at his altimeter and realized this was it.
Okay. Good. Bye.
6 seconds later, Michael Holmes hit the ground. When his colleague landed nearby, he saw Holmes lying in a blackberry bush, conscious. Michael was immediately rushed to the hospital, where they discovered he had a shattered left foot and ankle, which he'd landed on, broken ribs, and a punctured lung. If Michael Holmes had fallen from that height onto solid ground or water instead of that bush, he almost certainly would have died on impact. It was pure chance that saved his life. But if you crash into an active volcano, a bush definitely won't save you. In November 1992, cinematographers Michael Benson and Chris Duddy set out to film the volcanic cone of Pu'u in Hawaii. One of Hollywood's best pilots, Craig Hosking, agreed to fly them into the crater of the active volcano. As soon as they approached the crater, the helicopter suddenly started falling straight into the volcano. Everyone on board said their goodbyes. But miraculously, the aircraft didn't hit the molten lava. It crashed onto solid ground. Even more incredible, the crew was practically uninjured in the crash itself. And the crash site was exactly where fresh air flowed into the crater. Otherwise, the men would have suffocated from the toxic gases rising from the depths. These incredible coincidences saved their lives. Plus, it was only 300 feet to the crater rim, so it seemed like things weren't that bad. But that was an illusion. When the men tried to climb the slope, they were badly cut by sharp, red-hot rocks that crumbled at the slightest touch. Every second they risked falling into the boiling lava. Through thick gases and steam, the men could barely see anything and quickly lost each other. Pilot Craig Hosking miraculously managed to return to the crashed helicopter and call for rescuers, who were lucky enough to spot and rescue the pilot that same day. But Benson and Duddy were stuck on the wall and spent the next night in agony, listening to 1,800-degree lava bubbling beneath them. The next morning, Chris Duddy decided to climb higher, but Michael Benson thought it was too risky and stayed put. A few hours later, something that looked like a human body flew past him and fell into the lava. The man was overcome with despair. He barely held onto a tiny ledge, convinced his companions had died, and he faced the same fate. Without sleep or food, and in pouring rain, Benson spent 2 days. When the man felt he could fight no longer, a rescue net suddenly appeared next to him, lowered from a helicopter. Even better, Benson was told that all his companions were alive. What had flown past him the day before was a rescue package dropped from a helicopter. Chris Duddy safely escaped from the volcano 27 hours after the crash. So it turns out that a series of coincidences can save lives even when the laws of physics are against you. But an English worker managed to win a battle against a machine that even the Terminator would have lost. On Christmas Eve 2008, At a factory in South Yorkshire, Matthew Lowe was working. He was just walking past one of the automated conveyor belts when he suddenly felt his coveralls catch on something. Then something terrible happened. Lowe was thrown onto the conveyor and quickly pulled toward a 12-inch gap in the machinery. In just a few seconds, the man's entire body completely disappeared into the narrow tunnel. Only his head remained visible on the other side of the machine. The only thing Matthew managed to do was hear the crunch of his own bones and think that his end had come. The machine ejected Lowe's mangled body from the other side, but he remained conscious. Only then did the man feel hellish pain and scream. When other workers ran into the workshop, they froze in horror. Lowe's spine was broken in 2 places. His pelvis, ribs, and both thighs were almost completely shattered, and his abdomen with internal organs was torn. Matthew was immediately taken to the hospital, and his partner was advised to prepare for the worst. But despite all the doctor's predictions, Lowe fought for his life. He spent a month in the hospital and underwent 6 operations. Surgeons literally reassembled the man's body.
I suffered broken pelvis, broken hips, broken arm, broken back, broken ribs into. I ruptured my stomach and my bowel. So I think there were only my head that survived.
And within 18 months, Matthew was able to return to work, but in a different position. The only thing that reminds him of that disaster is weakness in his right arm and occasional panic attacks. Lowe's story fully deserves to be recreated in a sci-fi movie. But the case that happened to Stephen McCormick has already been seen in movies. On May 21st, 2011, in the town of Opotiki, New Zealand, experienced driver Stephen McCormick was working around his truck. He was standing between the truck's cab and trailer when he slipped and fell. But instead of ordinary pain, he felt his body inflating like a balloon, doubling in size. Colleagues and his adult son ran to the man's screams. It turned out that McCormick had fallen onto a brass compressed air valve of the brake system, which pierced the man's buttock, and gas under tremendous pressure burst into his body. McCormick's colleagues managed to stop the air supply and lay the man on the ground. But it turned out that the only 2 ambulances were busy, and Stephen had to wait for medics for a whole hour. When the man was taken to the hospital, it was discovered that the air had separated fatty tissues from muscles and filled all the space in his abdomen, chest, around his lungs and heart, and even behind the man's eyelids. Doctors had to run a tube between his ribs directly to his lungs so Stephen could breathe. The air from his body had to exit naturally, which took 3 days. After this, McCormick was discharged from the hospital completely healthy, and the only reminder of the incident was a puncture on his buttock. Doctors noted that if the valve had pierced any other part of the body, it could have damaged a vein or artery, and Stephen McCormick wouldn't have survived. Pure chance saved the man, and he couldn't influence the situation at all. But an Australian tourist had to make his own decision about whether he would fight for his life. On Sunday morning, September 15th, 2019, 50-year-old Neil Parker went on a short hike in the mountains near Brisbane, Australia. Neil was a longtime member of a hiking club and took all the necessary equipment. Moreover, he had walked that route many times, so he didn't even think to tell anyone where he was going. After an hour and 40 minutes, he began the familiar ascent up the mountain near a waterfall. But for some reason, the usually solid rock suddenly crumbled under Neil Parker's feet, and he fell. The man fell 20 feet into a shallow stream, breaking his left leg above the ankle and crushing his left wrist. The man tried to get his mobile phone from his pocket, but dropped it in the water. Then Parker realized he couldn't call for help or count on anyone looking for him. There was only one option left: get out on his own. Neil made a splint for his leg from hiking poles and began to crawl. But this proved so difficult that he had to rest after every meter he covered. But Parker kept moving, periodically eating some food and taking painkillers. Only after 2 days, on Monday, when Neil Parker didn't show up for work, did people start looking for him. Miraculously, someone remembered that the man had talked about plans to go to the mountains. but a helicopter was only sent there on Tuesday morning. Fairly quickly, rescuers spotted a man in the stream, waving something colorful above his head. It turned out that Neil Parker had not only survived, but had crawled over 2 miles from where he fell. He was lifted onto the helicopter and taken to the hospital. Doctors acknowledged that making a splint from hiking poles was a brilliant idea. Here's what I thought about. Neil Parker's situation was terrible, but he had tremendous experience, plus food and painkillers. But 28-year-old James Grimes had to get out of a similar predicament without even having solid ground under his feet. On November 23rd in New Orleans, the man boarded a cruise ship to celebrate the upcoming Thanksgiving Day. After sunset, James had a few cocktails and decided to go to the bathroom. The next moment, the man came to his senses in the middle of the endless waters of the Gulf of Mexico. Grimes was gripped by panic. He didn't remember how he fell overboard and didn't understand what to do next. At first, the man hoped that his absence would be quickly noticed and they would come back for him. But when he spent the whole night in the water, it became clear that this wouldn't happen. During this time, a large swarm of jellyfish badly stung his body, and when the sun rose, new trials awaited the man. Grimes noticed a fin in the distance. To his horror, a shark was approaching him. Then something touched his leg, and he struck back hard. He held his breath and waited for his own death, but nothing happened. The shark, if it really was one, never returned. Suddenly, James saw 2 ships on the horizon. He swam toward them for hours, thinking about his 10-year-old daughter and composing songs for her. The merciless sun, meanwhile, mercilessly burned Grimes' skin. When James had been in the water for 20 hours and was almost losing hope of seeing his family again, a life ring fell next to him. The man tried with his last strength to grab it, but powerful waves prevented him from doing so. Finally, a Coast Guard helicopter circled over James and rescuers descended to him. One of them noted that the man had a maximum of 1 minute left before death from hypothermia in the icy water. But I think this isn't the most amazing story in this video. Do you think it's possible to get inside a storm at cruising altitude and survive? On February 14, 2007, in the small Australian town of Manila, world paragliding champion Ewa Wisniewska was preparing to defend her title once again. The sky that day was absolutely clear, despite forecasts of a powerful storm. When the woman took to the air, the weather quickly changed, and clouds appeared around her. Ewa directed her paraglider under one of them when she suddenly felt herself caught by a crazy invisible force. At a speed of 65 feet per second, the woman flew upward straight into the epicenter of the storm. This was a natural phenomenon where warm air from below sharply rises up to meet cold air above. First, Ewa saw lightning flashing around her. Then she was swallowed by complete darkness. Due to the sharp change in pressure, the woman lost consciousness and didn't feel the violent hail hitting her, while nearly minus 60 degrees Fahrenheit frost covered her skin with ice. Eventually, the woman was pulled almost to the cruising altitude of a jet plane. 32,600 feet. At that altitude, there's so little oxygen that the human body literally begins to die cell by cell. For Ewa, this meant almost certain death, but almost an hour later, she came to and realized she was now flying on an uncontrolled paraglider downward toward her own death. At one point, Ewa's descent speed reached 108 feet per second, but completely unexpectedly closer to the ground, the fall slowed down, and the athlete managed to land just 37 miles from the starting point. The woman's entire body was covered with bruises from hail, and she severely frostbit her face, ears, and limbs. Wisniewska's survival was compared to winning the lottery 10 times in a row, and it really was nothing short of a miracle. But I saved the most incredible story for last, because even doctors can't explain how Anna Bogenholm managed to return to life. In May 1999, Swedish radiologist Anna was skiing in the mountains near Narvik, Norway. She was an experienced skier who had gone down those slopes many times and was descending with 2 colleagues. But none of this saved her from tragic accident that day. Anna lost control of her skis and fell. The woman landed on her back on a frozen stream, broke through 8 inches of ice with her head, and plunged her entire body into the icy water. Only her feet and skis remained above the surface. Bogenholm's colleagues immediately rushed to help her, but they couldn't get the woman out of the icy trap, so they called rescuers. Bogenholm panicked and thrashed under the ice when she suddenly managed to find an air pocket nearby and began breathing again. She spent 40 minutes conscious, waiting for rescue. However, the woman never managed to wait for it. She lost consciousness, and her colleagues no longer understood whether Anna was still alive. It took rescuers about 40 minutes to get the woman out of the water, so she no longer had any chance. When Bogenholm was brought to the hospital, her body temperature had dropped to the lowest level in medical history, 56.7 degrees Fahrenheit. Hours of attempts to bring the woman back to life yielded no results. But in cold Norway, doctors had a rule: warm the patient before declaring them dead. So, a team of over 100 specialists worked in shifts for 9 hours to return Bogenholm's body temperature to normal. Suddenly, she developed a pulse. This seemed absolutely incredible, but doctors weren't quick to rejoice. Anna had been dead too long, and the human brain suffers irreversible damage after a maximum of 20 minutes without oxygen. However, Bogenholm spent the next 35 days on artificial lung ventilation and came to consciousness. Incredibly, she showed no brain damage whatsoever, only the woman was paralyzed below the neck. 29-year-old Anna was horrified by the thought of spending the rest of her life bedridden and was very angry that she had been saved at all. But after another month in intensive care and long rehabilitation, Anna Bogenholm had completely recovered. Most people who suffer from severe hypothermia don't survive even if doctors manage to restart their heart. What happened to Anna is an absolute medical miracle. I've told you so many similar stories that I can't help but wonder, can they really be considered mere coincidence? These 8 people faced impossible odds and somehow lived to tell about it. What do you think? Are these just incredible coincidences, or is there something more at work here? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more unbelievable stories